All right, let's get into it. Today, we're unpacking one of the most influential and, yeah, one of the most controversial anarchist ideas to come out of the late 20th century. Hakim Bey's temporary autonomous zone, or the TAZ. This is a concept that ended up fueling illegal raves. It inspired a generation of cyber utopians, and it kicked off some pretty furious debates. And this question, this is really the heart of the whole thing. It's a challenge to that feeling that real, genuine freedom is always somewhere else, either way back in some romanticized past or often some faraway perfect future. The TAZ is Bouzé's proposed solution, a way to find that freedom right here, right now. So, here's the game plan. We're going to start with the pretty surprising inspiration for the TAZ, then we'll define what it actually is, see how the idea broke out into the real world, and then we'll dig into the intense debates and serious controversies that still swirl around it. To really understand the TAZ, which is such a forward-looking idea, we've got to first look backward. Way backward, actually, all the way to the golden age of piracy. Now, what's so fascinating here is that Hakim Bey wasn't into pirates for the swashbuckling and the treasure maps. No, he saw their hidden communities as something way more profound. Actual functioning societies that existed completely outside the control of any empire or king. So these weren't just random hideouts. Bey saw them as a kind of primitive information network that connected these free zones across the entire globe. They were mini societies, deliberately set up on remote islands, consciously choosing to live outside the law. And they did all this for what they called a short but merry life. And that last part? That's going to be really important. Okay, so you've got these pirate histories. How does that evolve into a modern tactic? Let's break down what a temporary autonomous zone actually is. This is the absolute core of the idea. A TAZ is not a call for some huge head-on revolution. The TAZ saw that as basically a suicide mission. Instead, it's more like a guerrilla operation. You liberate a space, and that could be a physical place, a block of time, or even just a space inside your own head. And then, this is the key part. You dissolve. You disappear before the authorities can show up and crush you. Really, the whole philosophy is baked right into the name. It has to be temporary, because if it's permanent, it becomes a target. It has to be autonomous, governed only by the people inside it. To pull that off, it needs to be basically invisible to the state, which is why it so often takes the form of something festal, like a party or a festival. It's a moment of collective joy that doesn't immediately look like a political threat. It's a tactic of striking and then just vanishing. And this gets at the almost mystical quality of the TAZ. How do you find one? Well, Basie said you shouldn't just look at a regular map. You should take a map of your own imagination, your own desires, and lay it over the real world. The TAZ appears in those cracks, in what he called secret tunnels and surprises, all the places where the rigid grid of control starts to break down. Now, this all might sound a little abstract, a little poetic, but believe me, this idea did not stay locked up in a book. In the late 80s and 90s, it found a very, very eager audience. What's pretty wild is how ahead of his time Beatty was about the power of information networks. He called it the web. But he wasn't just talking about computers. He meant zines, phone trees, word of mouth, basically any non-hierarchical way of sharing information. And he saw this web as the absolute essential nervous system for creating and connecting these temporary zones. So naturally, when the actual World Wide Web started to form, the TAZ became required reading. For all those early hackers and digital pioneers, cyberspace felt like this brand new frontier. It was a territory that could, in theory, be free from governments and corporations. I mean, a perfect digital space to build a TAZ. And at the exact same time, a totally different subculture was grabbing onto the idea. The illegal rave scene. I mean, think about it. It's a perfect fit, right? The organizers secretly share a location through that web, thousands of people show up, they create this intense zone of music and freedom for one night, and then they vanish before the sun comes up. Suddenly, the fight for the right to party became a real political act, a TAZ in the flesh. But not everyone was celebrating. In fact, within the anarchist movement itself, Bey's ideas were setting off fireworks. It sparked a really fierce backlash. Okay, so the biggest critic was a major figure named Murray Bookchin, who was all about social anarchism. And as you can see, their worldviews were just polar opposites. Benny was focused on these fleeting individual moments of freedom, what Bookchin kind of sneeringly called lifestyle anarchism.
Bookchan, on the other hand, argued for the slow, hard, organized work of building lasting communities that could actually challenge the state, not just hide from it.
And the pushback came from other corners, too. The anarcho-primitivist John Zerzan just totally dismissed the TAZ as word salad. He saw it as nothing more than a cool-sounding phrase without any real political substance. For a lot of the old-school revolutionaries, this just wasn't serious politics. The debate over whether the TAZ is good or bad politics is one thing, but there's another layer here, a much deeper, much more personal controversy that makes its legacy incredibly complicated. And this really forces us all to confront a very difficult question, one that hangs over this entire body of work. What do you do when a powerful idea comes from a person who might be deeply, deeply compromised? So the author who used the name Hakeem Bey was a man named Peter Lamburn Wilson. In the late 90s, a critic, Robert P. Helms, published some very serious allegations that Wilson had written for pro-pederasty journals. Helms's argument was that this context completely reframes the TAZ, that it wasn't a philosophy for universal freedom, but one designed to create opportunities for exploitation. Now, the discourse around this is extremely complex. Academics like Simon Sellers have analyzed Wilson's other writings, pointing out that, from a Foucauldian perspective, Wilson was arguing that our modern ideas about sexuality aren't timeless truths, but are instead social constructs that change over time. Now, this doesn't excuse or resolve the allegations, but it is crucial context for understanding how the debate itself is framed. So, given all of this, the intellectual arguments, the deep personal controversy, where does that leave the TAZ today? Is it still relevant? I think this quote really speaks to the idea's staying power. As the theorist Benjamin Noyes points out, no matter where you look in radical politics, the act of creating a zone, some kind of space that's carved out from state control, it keeps showing up as the answer. Which really brings us to our final question. In our world of constant surveillance, of social media, of digital tracking, is the TAZ's whole tactic of disappearance just a romantic fantasy from a bygone era? Or is the search for these fleeting moments of freedom, these cracks in the system, actually more urgent and more necessary than ever before?